China's taken exception to comments made by the US Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth. Now, he's spoken at the security conference called the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, and Pete Hegseth has said a Chinese invasion of Taiwan could be imminent. China not too happy. The Foreign Ministry says the US should not play with fire or try and use Taiwan to contain Beijing. Let's get more on those comments made at the Shangri-La Dialogue Security Conference. And joining us now to discuss this further is Melissa Conley-Tyler, Foreign Policy Expert and Honorary Fellow at the Asia Institute at the University of Melbourne. Melissa, good morning. Thank you for your time.
Good morning.
So these comments, Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defence, talks at this major security dialogue and says, got to warn you, a Chinese invasion of Taiwan could be imminent. Should we be reading too much into that?
Look, I think he went with a very specific goal, which was to reassure Indo-Pacific allies and partners that the US wasn't just going to cut and run. The contrast for me would be the comments made at the Munich Security Dialogue, where Europeans were told in no uncertain terms that they were essentially on their own. In this case, I think he had to walk a fairly tight line between saying, yes, the US cares, yes, the US is present, but if we're not trying to escalate as such. And I think when he talked about, it could be imminent, he also said, we hope it isn't imminent, which I think is a fairly carefully calculated diplomatic message to Beijing.
Yeah, because China's, obviously taken exception to this. It says, hang on, this is baseless, but it also hasn't ruled out the use of force, right? So is there an element of truth into what Pete Hegseth is saying?
Look, I think what everyone wants for this frozen conflict that has been there since the end of the Chinese Civil War is that we don't upset the apple cart. It would be enormously catastrophic for both the people of Taiwan and for the region and for our economies. So what we actually want is good sense and trying to moderate the situation and not escalate. I think Hegseth did a good job of trying to walk that line.
You mentioned there a moment ago potentially catastrophic. Just taking a step back for a moment, Melissa, what are the fears in Asia broadly if China does go ahead and invade Taiwan?
I think we've got to think of it not just in terms of invade, but the range of things that China can do, the sort of grey zone that they can do. So every day at the moment, they are, sending cyber attacks, they are sending military overflights. The thing that worries me most actually is not anyone deciding to make a conflict, but it just happening because of accident. Because one of these things goes wrong, something crashes into something else, and nobody is prepared to stand down, prepared to de-escalate. I think the message you need to send over and over again is this should not be changed by force. And that's Australia's position and has been under governments, forever, that we don't want this changed by force. And you keep pushing that, keep making clear to China that there would be very bad consequences if it tried to change by force. And the same to Taiwan to say, don't go and declare independence because that would be a very bad idea.
Reading into this morning, some analysts have said that Pete Hegseth has fundamentally changed the US position on Taiwan compared to that of his predecessor. Do you think that's a fair comment? How much have things changed?
No, I don't think so. I think this is actually pretty standard in the US history of, essentially strategic ambiguity. Don't try and change it by force because we might be there to try to help. I think actually if you look at the Biden administration, I'm thinking of at least 3 times where he had said something which was not US policy. He said, yeah, absolutely, we'd put boots on the ground. And then all of his advisors had to talk that back and say, no, he wasn't changing US policy, he was just talking off the cuff. So from that perspective, I think this is well within the range of what I'd expect a US Secretary of Defence to say.
Yeah, there were a few of those instances, weren't there, in the previous administration. China obviously has taken exception to this, saying, hang on, it's the US that's the biggest troublemaker in the Asia region. Just on that, what impact could comments like this from Pete Hegseth have in the region?
Well, look, I think there's a battle of narratives going on between the US and China and has been for a long time. China is trying to say, no, we're fine. It's the US that's unstable and destabilising the region, and the US is saying the opposite. What the audience of Southeast Asian and other Indo-Pacific leaders at Shangri-La make of it, interesting to see. I think from my perspective, the most dangerous thing the US could have done would have been to indicate that it didn't care about the region, because that's essentially more of a green light to say to China, well, nobody is going to push back. I think the fact that the US turned up, said it is committed to the region and it will push back where it needs to push back, I think that was the message that we need at the moment to maintain stability, which is, I think, the overall goal.